Now it's my pleasure to introduce the co-chairs of SF-CAT, Nancy Goldberg and Commissioner on the Status of Women Julie Su. Nancy Goldberg is past president of the Board of Directors for the Jewish Family and Children's Services, on the Board of Directors of Equal Rights Advocates, and on the board of the Prison University Project, regularly interacting with the inmates of San Quentin. Please help me give a warm welcome to our leader, Nancy Goldberg.
Thanks, Emily. That's really nice. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Emily. You've been a stalwart support of all we've done and accomplished. What a great team. I want to thank Antonia Levine, and of course, Emily, and my co-chair, Julie Su. Bravo for doing such a great job in my absence. Emily, I too remember that day in 2009 when we came together in this room. A week later, we gave birth to the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking and became one of the first public-private partnerships in the country to fight human trafficking in all its forms. 6 years ago, we were met with blank stares and incredulous looks as we discussed the epidemic of human trafficking, not only abroad, but right here in the San Francisco Bay Area, where we rank as a major destination along with San Diego and Los Angeles. Since that time, the focus has been mainly on sex trafficking and its victims, which have captured the headlines. As a result, full justice has not been given to both of these issues. The demand and numbers of victims who are labor trafficked must have more attention. Labor trafficking infiltrates so many areas of our day-to-day life. There is domestic servitude, agricultural trafficking, restaurant labor trafficking, personal service trafficking, and so much more. And because the demand is there, the growth continues. I'm not even going to try to give you numbers. You will be hearing many of the statistics during the course of this day. Just keep in mind how elusive it all is because of the clandestine nature and underreporting of these crimes. Today, our goal is to make the invisible visible. Let's bring labor trafficking out of the shadows. Sex trafficking and labor trafficking are interrelated. We have to learn to pay attention with our eyes and our ears. It's right in front of us. We can and will make a difference by the expertise and determination that is present in this room today. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here today.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Next, I'd like to bring up Commissioner Julie Su, a veteran member of the Commission on the Status of Women. Commissioner Su is Senior Staff Counsel with the California Department of Insurance. She's volunteered in a number of community causes, including hate crimes projects, civil rights education, and community health advocacy. She's a member of the Board of Trustees for St. Francis Memorial Hospital and co-chair of SF-CAT. Please help me welcome Commissioner Su.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm very pleased to join Emily and Nancy in welcoming you here today. We are all here to advance the work to end human trafficking in San Francisco. As a fourth-generation San Franciscan, I am committed to eradicating modern-day slavery in our neighborhoods and our businesses. Every day, hundreds of individuals are forced to work without adequate pay, lunch breaks, or safe working conditions. We can put an end to this exploitation and abuse. It takes a community, and today in our work groups, you will have a vast array, a cross-section of those who work day to day to help victims of human trafficking. I'd like to recognize my fellow commissioners, in particular, President Nancy Kirshner-Rodriguez right here in front. I don't know if Vice President Andrea Shorter is here. She's expected to join us later today, as our commissioners Amy Ackerman, Alicia Gomez, and Mary Jung. We also, at our recent planning retreat, we prioritize human trafficking as one of our work issues for the upcoming year and likely years to come. As you know, we also had the Justice and Courage panel, and that took a dozen years, and we finally got homicides down to 0 for almost 4 years on domestic violence. So we hope that with our work, we can accomplish greater and greater goals. And really a tremendous thanks to Dr. Marase and her team, in particular Iris Wong, Stephanie Nguyen, and Sara de Guzman, who is a fellow, and her proud dad is sitting back there. We just got to get reacquainted, her proud dad, Emil de Guzman. It gives me great pleasure to introduce State Senator Mark Leno. I've known him since he was in public service in San Francisco, first as supervisor in 1998. He's the grandson of Russian Jewish immigrants who became a highly successful businessman here in San Francisco. And throughout the years, he's been passionate and committed to serving his constituency, and that also now extends into Marin County. I'd really like to thank his staff. His staff has always been so committed to serving all the constituents, in particular Susan Sun, Beverly Ng, and Lamont Bishop, who helped us get this beautiful site here today. He was part of the California legislature when California adopted the California Transparency in Supply Chains Act in 2010, which was a landmark anti-labor trafficking law that is a model for this country. He also authored in 2012 SB 1133, and that allowed law enforcement to seize assets for those who exploited, in particular, youth and children in sex trafficking crimes. And that really put at least a big dent into the economic infrastructure of this criminal enterprise. So with that, I'd love to bring up State Senator Mark Leno.
Thank you, Commissioner and Dr. Marase, co-chairs of the collaborative, and all of you for being here today. And I know it took a little doing, given some of the challenges in our transportation system, but thank you very much for your commitment. And I think all of us are recognizing our own good fortune that we get to do this kind of work, that whether it's in a volunteer capacity or in our professional capacity, to be able to attend to this very devastating phenomenon of human trafficking and to be able to so improve the lives of so very many. And of course, with this particular kind of crime, those most vulnerable among us are at highest risk of being impacted by it. And we're talking about women and children and foster youth and immigrants. The second largest and fastest growing crime on the planet Earth, impacting about 27 million individuals, bringing in around $35 billion worth of profits each year for the perpetrators. So clearly, this will take the attention and the focus of the United Nations, the United States government, the government of the state of California, and our local government here in San Francisco as well. And the curiosity of it, of course, is that we are likely all witnessing these crimes in plain sight in our daily lives. Could be going on in restaurants or in construction sites, of course, behind closed doors and massage parlors. But in just about any industry, these survivors are coming. And with the assistance of the collaborative and so many of you here, we've been able to begin to address the complexities of this crime in the legislature in Sacramento with full support of our governor and with the great leadership of our Attorney General, Kamala Harris. We've made some real progress. And Julie Sue has mentioned some of the things that we've done in recent years, and just to touch on two that our office was able to author, and that would be the asset forfeiture bill that we did. And this was sponsored by Attorney General Kamala Harris. So working with her office, we were able to expand those items and possessions that can be seized as assets in a crime involving sex trafficking of someone under the age of 18. So whether we're talking about real estate property, a boat, a plane, cars, any kind of property that may have come from the crime committed is now able to be seized by the state. So it should then prevent the value of those assets from being used for further victimization and in use of further crimes. But we also, given that in traditional asset forfeiture law, the value of those assets benefit the state. In this case, 50% of the asset's value will be invested in community-based organizations who provide services to those who are surviving this crime. And that's really addressing part of the complexity here, because of course, yes, we have to address this up front in through awareness and educational campaigns, trying to prevent the crime, to address it from a legal perspective as it's happened, but then of course, all of the many services that are needed and necessary for survivors of the crime. And that can so often be housing and all sorts of social services, healthcare services, medical attention, and that's what these assets will be used for going forward. Then additionally, we realize that for victims as survivors, and we all need to attend to the use of our words carefully, shouldn't we? Because clearly those who are survivors may have been victimized, but they are currently survivors. And the stigma that can be used for those in terms of victimization is a serious impediment to their survival in itself. And so when talking about survivors of domestic violence, of sexual abuse, elder abuse, there was the opportunity for the survivor to be able to break a lease with his or her landlord, so that in the circumstance of having to find new housing because of the immediacy of safety concerns, it made sense that survivors of human trafficking should have that same opportunity and benefit to be able to get out of a lease. But then not only expanding the universe of those who could benefit from this statute, we also wanted to recognize that many survivors of human trafficking, for obvious reasons, may not want to go to law enforcement to get a restraining order or a police report, which was necessary to be able to substantiate with the landlord to be able to break the lease. And so there was an inability, a hurdle, to be able to do that if we didn't make that change as well. So now, documentation from any number of trained counselors who deal with survivors can be used in place of the restraining order or the police report, which is in many cases just not accessible. So again, helping those who need to get out of a dangerous housing situation no longer be burdened with that rent as they have to go find some new place to live and incur the cost of that as well. We think that'll go a long way in helping survivors be able to get back on their feet and get out of very dangerous situations. So you have a very exciting day ahead of you. Some extraordinary panelists will be presented in the next few minutes. And then, of course, the breakout workshops this afternoon I know will be very interesting, informative, and valuable as well. So thank you for doing the Lord's work. You know, there's something exciting and beneficial just to be in a room among like-minded people. And I'm not talking about the fact that we probably all supported the San Francisco Giants as they won their new World Series title this year, but like-minded in that we find ourselves in our professional work in a similar place. In Jewish tradition, we talk about tikkun olam, repairing the world. Our paychecks afford us the opportunity not only to be able to do our small part in making this a safer and better place for everyone. Talmud also teaches us that ours is not to complete the task, but neither is it for us not to begin it. So we're fortunate that our paychecks allow us to do the work that also fills our hearts and fills our souls. That makes us among the fortunate to be able to help those who are less fortunate. We thank you very much for being here.
Now I'd like to introduce Elmy Bermejo, who in May of this year was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve as regional representative for Labor Secretary Tom Perez. In a previous life, Elmy served as president of Hispanias Organized for Political Equality, chaired the board of directors of the Women's Foundation of California, and served on the California Commission on the Status of Women. She was also for many years on the staff for John Burton, and is really a political insider in Sacramento, and we were so excited when we heard that she was joining the Obama administration. She represented us there for several years, and we're so happy that she's now back in San Francisco. Please join me in welcoming Elmy Bermejo.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Emily, for that wonderful and kind introduction. It is really great to be back in San Francisco and doing the work that we all love and getting paid to do that. And also, you know, I want to thank Senator Leno, who's such a champion of making sure that we have access to public space to have these kinds of conversations. I know that he was instrumental in co-sponsoring the Working Families Summit that we did with the White House in May. So thank you, Senator. Thank you, Emily. And I see Nancy. Great to see so many partners in this space. Emily mentioned that I was on the Commission on the Status of Women for the state, and you know, I was chair when we did AB 22 by Sally Lieber, which was the about trafficking and making it a felony, and then we held public hearings throughout the state. So it was great to see this issue move forward and bring so many partners with a collaborative to that. The work of the Department of Labor in this space, and that's what I'm going to focus my remarks on. And first, the Department of Labor has 17 agencies under it, and some of those agencies are OSHA, the Women's Bureau, the Employment and Training Administration, which administers all our funding dollars, the Wage and Hour Division. And the Wage and Hour Division, that's whose work is relevant in this space. The work of the Wage and Hour Division is about making sure that people in the U.S. receive a fair day's pay for a hard day's work. And we do this by enforcing federal labor laws on topics including the minimum wage, overtime pay, record keeping, child labor, family and medical leave, migrant workers, worker protections in some temporary worker programs, and the prevailing wages for government service and construction contracts. Some of the numbers are, there are 7.5 million establishments or businesses and 135 million covered workers. And we have a little over 1,000 investigators nationally to do this work. So it's important to have really good partners. What those numbers mean is that we have to do strategic enforcement, which allows us to use our limited resources so that they have the largest possible impact on improving compliance as broadly as possible in this environment. Our efforts need to create ripple effects that impact complaints far beyond the workplaces where we physically conduct investigations or the organizations to which we provide outreach directly. The strategic enforcement is guided by priorities, but we also, by these priorities, and we also respond to worker complaints and complaints filed on behalf of workers by advocacy groups. The Wage and Hour Division and DOL, Department of Labor Enforcement, by agencies have made extensive and proactive efforts to reach out to vulnerable workers and with information about their rights under the civil labor laws that we enforce. We, about 2 years ago, received additional funding from the federal government to have people that we call the core community resource specialists. But they are out there in the communities, in the areas like, you know, garment workers, so they get to know these kinds of folks in those industries so that we can start having trust, get to know the different organizations, the different issues that come, so that people can raise some of these issues to the members of this. And we started with maybe 5 people nationally, and now in the region we have about 10 just in this region alone. And it was a program that was started with Secretary Solis was there. It's now growing, and it's something that's also championed by our current Secretary, Tom Perez. We also, at the Wage and Hour Division and at the Department of Labor, have significant language capabilities among our enforcement staff. Nearly 700 wage and hour employees speak a language other than English. More than 500 wage and hour employees speak Spanish. Wage and Hour's multilingual employees speak nearly 50 languages. Those include Arabic, Cantonese, Chinese, Creole, Farsi, Hindi, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Spanish, Tagalog, Thai, Taiwanese, Turkish, Urdu, Vietnamese, and Yoruba. These investigators are present during the questioning and assist in interviewing employees who have limited English proficiency. And when it comes to labor trafficking, it's important to emphasize that the Department of Labor does not investigate or prosecute trafficking in persons. We have an important role to play both within the department's core equities and as partners to our sister agencies in the federal government. We have oriented our work in this space around 3 strategic missions: supporting law enforcement by detecting this crime, circulating back wages owed to victims, and addressing underlying conditions of labor exploitation. Also engaging in international research, technical assistance, and monitoring, especially on the worst forms of child labor, and also contributing to the provisions of employment and training services to our survivors. It's really important here to make a clear distinction between labor exploitation, that is, the mistreatment of workers in violation of civil labor laws, and labor trafficking, which adds on the elements of force, fraud, coercion, and becomes a criminal offense. There is a broad continuum of labor exploitation that is inherently connected to labor trafficking, but does not rise past the criminal threshold. Trafficking can be understood as the tip of the larger iceberg of labor abuses. Through the Department of Labor's efforts to combat that broader continuum of labor exploitation by enforcing statutes entrusted to us, we believe that we are moving the dial to address the underlying conditions and the causes of labor trafficking. Now, beyond the broad role tackling labor exploitation, our role in the enforcement efforts against labor trafficking space is primarily one of support to our law enforcement partners. And because our investigators are in work sites across the country every day, we are uniquely positioned to help identify potential cases in the course of our regular investigations and make referrals to our law enforcement partners. We also help calculate back wages when requested, leveraging the expertise that we have in that space. We also participate in ACT teams, the anti-trafficking coordination teams, and human trafficking task forces around the country to better coordinate with our partners. In recent years, the Department of Labor has undertaken an effort to enhance our ability to provide this kind of support. In 2012, we delivered an updated identification and referral training to our investigators. And we're now in the process of updating that and enhancing it again for 2015. At the Secretary of Labor's direction, we have undertaken a review of our detection and referral process and are enhancing it significantly. Another key role we play in this space is certifying law enforcement supplements of the U visa applications for victims of certain crimes that we encounter in our day-to-day work. I'm also pleased to note that as part of the package of executive actions on immigration that the President announced a few weeks ago, the Department of Labor has committed to beginning to certify T-visa applications as well. And this will significantly help qualifying victims of these crimes to receive immigration relief from the Department of Homeland Security and access the range of victim services that they need to recover and rebuild their lives. In the employment and training space, our Employment and Training Administration, ETA, provides employment and training services through the network of about 2,400 American job centers, or sometimes they're called one-stop centers. And they've taken steps to enhance service provisions, including conference calls and webinars, to the public workforce system. In the international space, our International Labor Affairs Bureau maintains lists of goods and source countries we have reason to believe are made with forced labor or forced to or indentured child labor, and we provide technical assistance grants to combat the worst forms of child labor overseas. They also have an online toolkit to help responsible businesses that want to reduce forced labor in their supply chains. I'm really happy to note that our iLab recently updated both the lists of goods and the report on the worst forms of child labor. And yesterday, Labor Secretary Perez presented a 2014 Iqbal Masih Award, which is for the elimination of child labor. It was presented to Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa, who's been a longtime champion. The award honors the spirit of Iqbal Masih, a Pakistani child sold into bonded labor as a carpet weaver at the age of 4. He escaped to servitude and became an outspoken advocate for children's rights, drawing international attention in his fight against child labor. In 1995, Iqbal Masih was killed in Pakistan at the age of 13. Congress established the award in 2009 to recognize exceptional efforts by an individual or company. And Senator Harkin is the 6th recipient of this award. I'd just like to add that moving forward, when Emily was saying who has been there from the beginning, and I feel like I was absent, but I was in DC in my own defense. But I hope to, moving forward, work with all of you and all the partners, the collaborative, the Department on the Status of Women, and certainly our national office has a great interest in this issue and look forward to working with all of you. There were some resources on our website. It's www.dol.gov/ilab/reports. And then I can also make that available to Emily so that maybe we can email that to all the participants and you'll have that for resources. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to be part of this very important issue. Thank you.
Just a couple of follow-ups. Be sure you do get a copy of the CD, because the Wage and Hour Division did provide us with some resources to put on our conference CD. And Elmy mentioned AB 22. Before that was passed in the year 2000, trafficking in persons was not a crime in California. So that was really landmark, and Elmy really was at the very beginning. Together with Kamala Harris, they passed that law. It was modeled on a federal law making trafficking a felony in California. So we really thank her for that early work. And then I don't want to underestimate her announcement about T visas. So T visas are special visas for survivors of trafficking that enable them to stay. Because when they are detained as a result of enforcement action. When this happened in San Francisco several years ago under the Operation Gilded Cage, the survivors were given two choices. Well, they weren't even given two choices. They were basically given a choice of, not a choice of, but they were forced to be mostly deported. So when they get back to their home country, often the same trafficker will find them and send them right back here. So the opportunity to cooperate with law enforcement and be eligible for a T visa is really a huge opportunity. Thank you so much, Elmy. Now I want to introduce another very special guest, Sara Balabagan, who is a survivor of labor exploitation and sexual assault by her employer. From a poor family of 14 siblings, half of whom died as children, Sara was only 14 years old when she left the Philippines to work as a domestic helper in the United Arab Emirates in 1994. The abuse started soon after she began work at the home of an elderly widower and his 4 sons. I will let her tell you the rest of her harrowing tale, including being raped at knife point by her employer, whom she killed in self-defense, and how she escaped a death sentence by firing squad.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to thank God for this wonderful opportunity to be given a chance to speak and be part of this event. And I am truly honored and humbled. So allow me to thank all the organizers, and especially Honorable Judge Marianna Warmee for inviting me. Thank you so much. Human trafficking. Before every time I hear the word, or that word, the first thing that came to my mind is sex trafficking. Until one day someone approached and invited me to share my story and be part of their program about human trafficking. And that's the time I realized that what happened to me in the Middle East falls into a category of labor trafficking. Since then, I became very open to speak about my experience, not just as a victim of circumstances, but as an advocate. Because I believe labor trafficking is as horrific and harmful as sex trafficking is. It involves terrible abuses too. Like my experience, I was only 14 years old when I decided to work as a domestic worker in the Middle East, hoping this way I can help my family. But in our country, in the Philippines, the age that allowed to work abroad is 24 years old and above. So my recruiter forged my age on my passport and put 28 years old. Yes, ×2 of my real age. But then, unmindful of that seeming discrepancy, I boarded a plane with high hopes. And upon my arrival at my employer's house, I learned that my boss was a widower. But after 2 weeks, my boss or my employer started to bribing me or sexually harassing me. And he even offered me money in exchange for sexual favors. But I never even once submitted to his advances. I always run away and locked myself in my room. But then when I had a chance, I told my agent, he's a Palestinian guy who owns the agency in Alain, UAE, about my situation. I asked him to just transfer me to another employer. But instead of helping me, he encouraged me to just accept the offer and just do what my employers want me to do. As a young girl, I felt so devastated and helpless. I didn't know what to do. I don't even know the telephone number of the local police nor the Philippine embassy in UAE. So when my boss found out that I talked to my agent and seeking for help, he got so upset and angry at me. And for the first time, he entered my room and beat me up. But then I thank God because I managed to push him away, and I was able to run and ask for help from one of his sons. You know, my first month's salary was taken by my agent. He told me that I needed to pay him 3 months' worth of my salary because my employer was willing to pay me only $150. I was so shocked when I found out because I told differently. And on the contract that I signed before I left the Philippines, it stated that my salary would be $250 and not 150. But then again, as a 14-year-old girl, young and naive, I had no choice but to stay. Because, again, I didn't know what to do. I had to endure the hard work, the abuse, and the harassment. until one night in July 1994 when my boss sexually assaulted me with a knife. And thank God, because I had the courage to fight back. Because in my mind, I'd rather he kill me than succeeding with his evil intention. So we struggled and we fought. I cried out for help, but he choked me to stop me from screaming. And as he was choking me with his right hand, his left hand was undressing me. Out of my desperation, I started feeling around for anything that I could use to fight off this man trying to rape me. When all of a sudden, with my left hand, I found his knife and I had no other choice but to stab him. And that proved to be fatal. You know, it's so unfortunate that someone had to die, but I had to defend myself in order to survive. The laws in the United Arab Emirates are so different, especially if you are a female overseas worker like me. I was charged guilty of premeditated murder until I proven innocent. In September 6, 1995, I was sentenced to death by firing squad. Thank God, because of the appeal, because of all the support and prayers of so many people, and because of the appeals of our Philippine government, I was proven to be a minor and not 28 years old according to my forged documents. So my sentence was commuted to 1 year imprisonment, 100 lashes on my back, and a $40,000 US as a blood money. Of course, my parents or my family in Mindanao, we don't have a $40,000. But thank God, there's someone that God used as a Filipino Chinese businessman who voluntarily paid the $40,000 US. And the 100 lashes were done in 5 consecutive days because I was a minor. They've done it 20 lashes a day for 5 days. And yes, it was really painful because they used a cane. Every day they whipped me, it was on the same spot. That's why after the 100 lashes, my back became so black that for several weeks I was unable to sleep on my back or on my sides because of the pain. But thanks be to God, I survived, and after 2 years in prison, they sent me back to the Philippines on August 1, 1996. And now I keep wondering how many people out there survived the same ordeal that I went through. Or how many victims of labor trafficking received justice. And how many of them perished. How many victims out there were able to defend themselves? And maybe we couldn't hear them. But there are many of them who are hopelessly and helplessly crying out for help. But then the question is, are you willing to help them? Will you be willing to do something to prevent and stop this terrible crime? Will you be their voice? You know, I hope and pray that each one of us here today will have the heart to empathize towards the victims of labor trafficking. Edmund Burke said, The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I understand that labor trafficking is happening all over the world. And this is a huge problem and a great challenge, not only to the third world countries, but also here in the United States of America. But I believe if we work together, hand in hand, we can fight and overcome this dilemma. And in the Bible says in Galatians 6:9, do not get tired of doing what is right, for in a proper time, we or you will reap the harvest. God bless us all, and to God be the glory.
Now it's my great pleasure to introduce the Honorable Marianna Warmee, an administrative law judge at the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I learned that when she was appointed in the year 2000, she was the youngest administrative law judge in the country. So we're very fortunate to have her with us. She has trained law enforcement officers throughout the state on how to successfully investigate human trafficking crimes. She's a founding board member of Freedom House in San Mateo County, the first shelter for victims of human trafficking in Northern California, and serves on the steering committees of the Jewish Coalition to End Human Trafficking and the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking. Please join me in welcoming Judge Warmee.
Good morning. As we've heard, when we talk about human trafficking, often we think of sex trafficking, but the reality is that the vast majority of trafficking crimes worldwide are actually labor trafficking operations. And while we've had a lot of movement in sex trafficking in this state and in this country, the same can't be said of labor trafficking. And we have an incredible panel here today. I'm so honored of people who are at the forefront of anti-trafficking in the Bay Area. So I'd like to welcome all of them from left to right. We have Dr. Gina Castro-Rodriguez, who is the new Victim Services Chief at the District Attorney's Office in San Francisco. And she comes here today with a wealth of expertise in victimology and trauma. We have Annemarie Conroy, an Assistant U.S. Attorney, who has served, if you look at her bio, you will see she has served in so many important roles in the city, including she's a former member of the Board of Supervisors of San Francisco, and as a representative of the U.S. Attorney's Office, she is at the top of the food chain for federal law enforcement and an expert in organized crime, which is so involved in labor trafficking. Next to her, we have Regional Attorney Bill Tamayo from the EEOC San Francisco District Office. Regional Attorney Tamayo has been recognized nationally for his work in protecting some of the most vulnerable workers out there, including farm workers and those workers who have been subjected to sexual assault in the workplace. Instead of Chief Sir, who has been called away, we were scheduled to have the Chief of Police from the San Francisco Police Department, Chief Sir, but he got called away on an officer-involved shooting at the last second, and so we are so grateful to Teresa Gracie, who's the captain of this Special Victims Unit, and I can just personally attest to all the incredible work that the Special Victims Unit has done for victims in the Bay Area, and it goes largely under the radar. But from my experience working with victims and their interaction with SFPD, they have done incredible, incredible work and helped so many people, and I have great respect for them. And actually, Special Victims Unit was the recipient of the Abolitionist Award from SFCAT last year for their work. Next to Teresa Gracie, we have Casey Bates, who's a Deputy District Attorney from Alameda County. And he's the head of the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit. That's the Heat Watch, if any of you are familiar with that. Heat Watch, in my opinion, is one of the most important and innovative anti-trafficking organizations, not only in the Bay Area, but in the country. And what they have done has forwarded the anti-trafficking agenda hugely. They have led the way in so many areas. So we're very honored to have Deputy District Attorney Bates here, and he's also a sensational speaker. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Tanya Chafee, who is the Associate Clinical Professor of Pediatrics at UCSF. She's the Medical Director of the Child and Adolescent Support Advocacy and Resource Center and Director of Teen Services at San Francisco General Hospital. And as we heard from our wonderful speaker, who is a survivor, Sara, it's not just sex trafficking that affects kids. It's labor trafficking. And while our survivor talked about her experience in a foreign country, the truth of the matter is that this is happening here, and it's happening in the Bay Area. And Dr. Chafee has extensive experience, of course, in dealing with traumatized children. And so she's going to be talking about the intersection of sex and labor trafficking. But to begin our program, I want to sort of put this phenomenon of labor trafficking in the context of the global economy. And I'd ask Regional Attorney Tamayo, can you talk about that? How does this fit in with the global economy?
Thank you, Marianna, and good morning to everybody. Regional Attorney for EEOC is kind of a vague title, so I should just tell you I have two functions. One is to decide which company to sue for employment discrimination using the federal government's money. And the second job is to decide how much to settle for or not. And so it's a fun job. But I've been asked to put this issue in a context. So I always, at all the trafficking conferences, I say, labor trafficking is in the DNA of the United States. It is at its foundation. Our nation's economy was founded on labor trafficking. So remember that, okay? This is not a new phenomena. We created a state, a country of inequality, and we relied on labor trafficking to make sure that the economy developed. And we should know that most people think, oh, it was slavery in the South to make certain products. But there's two notions you should know. First, there were a lot of people who were indentured servants who came from Europe and were forced to stay with their employers, could not leave, had to pay off major debts. And I would argue that's a certain form of trafficking. But number two is the biggest, in the United States, the use of slaves and the dependence on the African slave trade, which was global already, but dependence on the African slave trade to bring labor to the United States to develop the Southern economy. But this is where the global economy really gets accentuated. While they grew some products for domestic consumption, most of the products in the South was cotton for export to Britain and other parts of Europe. That is the global economy at the heart of the foundation of the United States. So I want to move it a few more years. So I was saying, well, why does this problem that persists, that our office has been litigating a lot of cases of farm workers being raped in the fields of California, Oregon, Washington, all over the United States. And my jurisdiction is just above Fresno all the way to Alaska, including Idaho, Montana, and northern Nevada. So it's not until 2004 when I had the opportunity as part of a federal executive training to go to Thomas Jefferson's plantation in Monticello in Virginia. And then it hit me. I said, wow, this is why we have issues of farm workers being raped in the 21st century. When Thomas Jefferson wanted any woman for sex on his plantation, he could go and tell her, I'm going to have sex with you, and that was perfectly legal. Or if the overseer of the plantation said, I want to have sex with you, I'm going to have it, no objections, no fighting, he could do it. Perfectly legal. And then, if her partner, husband, protested, he was usually killed, beaten, whatever, perfectly legal. But now we have laws against that kind of behavior by employers. And I should tell you, this year is the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which includes Title VII, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, or religion. So it is that law that has allowed us to bring lawsuits against employers, particularly agricultural employers, where women have been literally raped in the fields. So those laws, however, are meaningless if Maria can never access them. So perpetrators do everything that they can. Threaten deportation, threaten harm to the family, killing the husband, termination, what have you, further harassment as threats to make her quiet so that she can't protest, so that she can't do anything. And I might just add here, many people say, oh, is this because these women are undocumented? Because they're here illegally, they're victims. And I would say, to a certain extent, yes. Immigration status becomes one more weapon in the arsenal of a perpetrator. But as we know, a lot of perpetrators are not just in the farms. There's perpetrators in the military, which is why you can explain, like, why does a white U.S. citizen, English-speaking woman, graduate of West Point, get threatened, raped, and is scared to tell her story because the institution doesn't support her? But coming back to labor trafficking, we know that this has been an area that unfortunately we have neglected, particularly as the federal government. Growers and agricultural and plantation owners wanted in particular a docile workforce that they could control. In fact, Congress was complicit in making them making that workforce not have rights. So in 1935, when laws were passed to allow labor organizing, like the National Labor Relations Act and Fair Labor Standards Act to create better living conditions, the growers explicitly worked to get agricultural workers exempt from those laws so that farm workers still until to this day, except in California, cannot organize for unions. They're not covered by the National Labor Relations Act, and certain exemptions in the Fair Labor Standards Act continue. Why this issue is particular for the EEOC, and I will get into cases that we're litigating right now, is because we do have laws to at least address some of the violations that occur, particularly against the disabled, particularly against women, against certain racial minorities, and we have been able to recover millions of dollars for them. So we have these civil remedies under Title VII, the Americans with Disabilities Act, to be able to give money to people who are victims so that they can become whole and compensate them, and then we can require the employer to pay more money to the victims. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Indeed. I want to ask AUSA Conroy, why do you think it's important that we go after labor trafficking now?
Thank you, Bill. Good morning. The 13th Amendment is very simple in its words of neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States. It's pretty clear, pretty straightforward. And the issue of labor trafficking has been one that's been quite vexing for, I think, local, state, and federal law enforcement. It's tougher to get at, it's tougher to see, it's easier to see CSEC, the commercial sexual exploitation of children. You can do data scraping on some of the sites. We can look at social media. We can use a lot of different tools to get at the sex trafficking, or we can go to International Boulevard, which is Casey Bates is making a huge difference there in OPD. But you see it, you know what it is. A lot of people don't recognize what labor trafficking is, or when they see it, those indices. I think we have a long way to go in that regard. And human trafficking, whether it's labor or sex trafficking, it's insidious, and it's all over the United States, it's all over the world, it's all over the Bay Area, despite the fact that the Bay Area probably has the highest awareness of the issue of human trafficking, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. It's a global issue, but it's a local crisis. And it's modern day slavery, as we all know. It's not shackles and chains, but it's coercion, it's fraud, it's forced, it's threatening of families, the kind of things that Bill was talking about. Goes on every day, unfortunately. People too frightened to come forward, people not knowing how to come forward, people seeing things that don't quite make sense, kind of look odd, might be trafficking, not sure, those types of things. It's prevalent in restaurants and hotels, the hospitality industry, anywhere there's a need for cheap labor, construction, domestic nannies, those types of things, manufacturing, nursing homes, agriculture. So our district, the Northern District of California, runs from the Oregon border down to San Benito County. So we have three major cities of San Francisco, San Jose and Oakland. So you've got 3 metropolitan areas where certain things go on for labor trafficking and sex trafficking. But then you've got Humboldt County, Mendocino County, Del Norte County, where there's, we find very large marijuana grows, and people are being trafficked there to tend the marijuana gardens. So we have that. Then we've got agriculture down in Salinas and Monterey, Gilroy, Watsonville, lots of agriculture, as Bill knows. Lots of issues there. Salinas is the salad bowl of the world, and the amount of agriculture that we have in our district is pretty big. So the types of trafficking that go on in just the Northern District of California just run the gamut from major city to small town USA and farming towns. I mean, we've seen it on the Bay Bridge, the exploited workers that were Thai workers. I mean, this is an iconic, huge public works project, and trafficking of Thai workers on that project. It's amazing that happened in the Bay Area. Marianna and I were talking a little bit about how do we stop those kinds of things, and and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Is working with some of the employers, if the bid's too low, it's probably for a reason. There's either traffic labor or exploited labor. So something's wrong when your bid comes in really much lower than everybody else. So that should be, we'll talk about this again a little bit later, of working with employers as to their own indices of seeing where things might be better served. And then the other thing is, we'll be having our 3rd annual gathering of the human trafficking task forces that are throughout the Northern District of California. There's some that are very formal, some are more loosely formed. So each year we've brought everyone together in the district that's working on the issue of human trafficking at the executive level of the chiefs and the district attorneys. We had 7 elected district attorneys at our last meeting to talk about these issues. So they're taking it very seriously. And to a person, everyone has said that the labor trafficking is the hardest to get at. So having these kind of gatherings and these convenings to work with the NGOs, law enforcement, local, state, and federal government to really start looking at these issues and how to get really at these issues is extremely important. So I applaud the organizations here today that put this together, because it's definitely needed.
Thank you.